Hi, welcome to Her Legal Lenz. I'm Amber Cohen.
And I'm Kelly Sanders.
Okay, so we're going to catch up because we're behind a little bit from our a week away in New York City at Legal Week. And so we're going to wrap up day 11, 12, 13, and get prepared for day 14. So starting off with day 11. Well, actually, before we go there, I just want to say if you have any thoughts while we're working through some of our trial analysis, feel free to comment and let us know what you're thinking. Hopefully, not all negative, but certainly some good constructive criticism or where some things that we may be missing because we may see it differently. This is really where a jury sort of comes together and gets to analyze and look at things. And so what you may see may be different from what we see. And so we really do want to make this a sort of a collaborative discussion. And if you like what you see, please like and subscribe to our channel. We're just starting out and we're having a lot of fun. This trial in particular is a really interesting trial to sort of cut our teeth on, so to speak. So, all right, Kelly. So day 11, how does it start off?
Day 11 starts off a little bit slow, starts a little bit of a, sludge through the prosecution and the defense, really trying to look through and redactions for Carmen Lauder's testimony. So if we recall, there's this allegation by the defense that there was some additional text messages that they received about Carmen Lauder possibly violating her probation. And during their cross-examination, they opened the door to this idea that an insinuation that Carmen was falsifying her testimony or fabricating her testimony for immunity, right? So to help the police. So the prosecution wants to introduce Carmen's consistent statements with her testimony, which is this 1,000 pages of transcripts, about 10 hours of recorded interviews, because she's interviewed over 6 times. It's about 10 hours. Like I said, 1,000 pages. And the prosecution is seeking to introduce about 100 of those pages. So there's a lot of back and forth for hours and hours, going back and forth on what's going to be allowed in to be introduced, what's the best way to do this, send the transcripts back to the jury, play videos for the juries to see. And the defense was really fighting back about the idea that this should really come in through Carmen so that they can cross-examine her on this. I know that during this process, Attorney Lewis for Kouri Richins had mentioned that she's never seen this done anyway, but through a witness. And I haven't either. I've never seen this type of evidence and consistent statements not come in through a witness. But the judge came out with some very clear case law that indicated this was possible under their rules. And just because you don't normally see it done this way doesn't mean the prosecution's not allowed to do it this way.
Yeah, so ultimately, I think they did narrow it down and they took a 24-hour break, right? They sort of halted the case. The judge, this was day 11 where they stopped it and came back with Carmen, right? Because ultimately the defense won that piece and they said, well, if you're going to do this, they want to bring her back.
Well, the judge actually ruled that they did not need to bring Carmen back. The judge raised some concerns, though, about how much of a highlight on Carmen's testimony it would be if they send back all of these transcripts back to the juror, and Carmen would be the only witness that the juror would be sent back these transcripts for. And so it's like drawing a big bullseye around Carmen's testimony that, you're supposed to pay more attention to hers than any other witness. And so the judge had some reservations about doing it this way, but ultimately he ruled the prosecution could publish it to the jury through the videos. And the reason for the break then was so that the prosecution and their video editor could then edit the videos consistent with the transcripts that would also go back to the jury. So it's about 100 pages, and we do listen to that testimony, those interviews the following day that are introduced through Detective O'Driscoll. But ultimately, yeah, after a lot of back and forth with the judge, he does let them introduce this, but there's a little bit of a twist come day 12 when the prosecution does decide to call Carmen anyways. But I don't know, did you have anything else on day 11 that we
No.
didn't touch on before we get into that? Yeah, the only witness we saw on day 11 was Chris Kadamas, who it was a very short, simple, it was just foundational testimony. He's a cellbrite extractionist expert. He just testifies that to what he does, what he did in this case, which is extract Kouri and other witnesses' cell phones, just foundation to get in what we'll eventually hear through Detective O'Driscoll. Defense doesn't ask a single question, and then they break for about 24 hours to come back the next day. Well, at least the jury breaks for those
24 hours.
24 hours.
Yeah, they're still working. All right, and so then they come back on day 12 and the midday, they come back, I think around 1 o'clock their time, mountain, I think it's mountain time. And they put Carmen on, right?
Yeah, so in a little bit of a twist, right, they bring the jury back at 1 o'clock and the prosecution calls Carmen Lauder. And to, I think, everybody's surprise, perhaps even the defense, the prosecution doesn't ask Carmen a single question. They just say to her, I think the defense has some questions for you. So I think that perhaps the prosecution thought, hey, we're this far in this, possibly that they thought, we're this far in this case. The judge did kind of highlight, like, ooh, maybe this is an area that we have to tread carefully on. So don't want to open the doors for any possible appeals from the defense that they didn't get an opportunity to cross-examine Carmen on these topics. And so she's called and the defense is allowed to cross-examine her in what I would call a big waste of time. What do you think
Yeah.
about her cross-examination or recross?
I think Attorney Lewis had the cross-examination, and I think she was caught off guard a little bit that the state didn't have any particular questions for her. And really, I think because of that, it was less than impactful. It was not really anything that I think swayed it one way or the other. I mean, they were obviously trying to make it look like she was lying. I actually think Carmen did better, right? So she's now had practice on the stand in front of this jury, so she looked prepared in the sense that, hey, what else do you want? And they were talking about, well, you used alcohol, right? I mean, you drank alcohol, and and she's like, no. And then they're like, well, that's what the probation violation said. I mean, it was all about this probation violation, and it just, I don't know. I mean, to me, it felt flat. It really felt flat. And I think, it probably, if you're a juror, you might be annoyed, like, or curious, like, why did they just do that? Like, what is the point of all this? Why did that happen? They might be confused and just say this is really a waste of our time.
This is one of those cases where you got what you asked for, and I don't think they came prepared for actually being given the opportunity to do this in a way that was going to be meaningful. And it might have just been better to have left well enough alone on the last, oh, not sure I would call it well enough on the last cross. But I don't know that it helped. I don't know that it helped them. It may have hurt them because, like you said, it may have endeared the jury to Carmen a little bit more, thinking that the attorney Lewis has already beaten up on her enough already, and perhaps that this was just a little bit of overkill.
Plus, again, like the defense doesn't have this burden. And what's frustrating is that I feel like they have woven some of this doubt through her motive behind her testimony, right? It's this immunity. It's obviously get out of jail free card, so to speak, right? Her testimony's changed. It took however many interviews to get her to that point. And this basically kind of the same with Robbie. Robbie's testimony has changed. Well, I should say it was enticed for him. It was like, hey, you're sort of the piece of the puzzle and you got a lot to say. Or actually, maybe that was Carmen. But, I think that both of them, that's always the issue with when you're using sort of these witnesses that have deals, right? Promises, inducements, and rewards, is that you always can ask them or ask the jury to consider the credibility of these witnesses. Like, why would they be doing this? And why? And maybe they're enhancing this story a little bit. And so, I think they did enough with Carmen the first round. I don't think they needed her. And, that was whatever. It's a big nothing burger, as they say. So, all right. Then they move on to, well, then they bring on the lead investigator, right?
Yes, Detective O'Driscoll, who the prosecution has already kind of previewed a couple days ago that this would be their final witness in their case in chief. So Detective Driscoll was the successor officer to Deputy Woody. So he comes on as the lead investigator. His expertise that he's really brought in for is to be the one to try to trace the drugs that Eric took. So that's why he takes a particular interest, in Carmen. But his testimony actually starts off with, and I'm curious for your feedback on this and what you thought. It really starts off with talking about Kouri and the book that she wrote. So they start with introducing evidence that they had submitted subpoenas to ABC, requesting emails, exchanges with Kouri. And they go into how Kouri was reaching out to Good Morning Utah, trying to get on their show as this children's book author, talking about how to help your children through grief. They bring her on for a 3 to 4 minute segment. So they introduce those to show that Kouri is the one reaching out, trying to promote this book. They also introduced some text messages to indicate that Kouri was using a ghostwriter to write this book. And I'm curious, like I wrote down while I was watching this, like why is this relevant? How does it prove the murder, a potential murder, one way or the other? How does it prove that Kouri forcibly forced Eric to ingest fentanyl in some way, that she had a ghostwriter? What did you think about that? I didn't particularly see the relevance of that.
Well, I think what the prosecution is doing is they're showing her post-death behavior and to show consciousness of guilt. And so I think, although I don't necessarily see it or agree with it, but I think it goes to the sort of circumstantial evidence that she is, that they're setting up to say, and look, she paid someone to monetize basically off of this death. Like she didn't write it, right? She wasn't actually grieving. She didn't write it. So she paid someone to write it, and then they monetize this book. She wants to get on TV. She's using this opportunity to make something of herself. And so I think that post-death behavior is what they're analyzing there and talking about and sort of suggesting that really, this circumstantial evidence, consciousness of guilt, or lack of guilt, I guess. I'm not sure however you look at it, but she's sort of, and again,
The
if you,
only
yeah.
No, no, go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, I was just going to say, and if you look at it from the other side, I mean, again, she could truly be grieving and want to look at her kids and say, hey, this is helpful. Dad's still here, and maybe she's not a good, I mean, we've seen her writing. She's not a great writer. So, she helps ask someone for help. I mean, isn't that what you're supposed to do? You ask for help and you get a ghostwriter and you put out a product and she's a very entrepreneurial type of person. I mean, she's obviously been a go-getter starter. We see that. In fact, I think that's why her and Eric have the relationship they do. They both seem to be sort of business savvy people. So I don't think that just because her husband dies means that stops. So for me, I think the jury will, if they're on the side of the prosecution at this point, they're going to really judge her for that and say, oh, look at that,
The only
trying to,
thing I thought later on, okay, maybe this is what they're trying to combat, because to me, the prejudicial value of it seemed more like Kouri's holding herself out as this author, but she didn't really write it. Look at this, one more incident of which Kouri lied. Like that's kind of how I took what they were trying to get across there. But I think that there are a lot of authors that do, have authored books that have used ghostwriters. I don't necessarily buy that as, it's just some act of untruth, but I thought, well, maybe what we're going to hear later, right, is this walk the dog letter. And there was some discussion, and while I didn't read the letter, I did peek at some, commentary on this letter and what was argued by the defense in pretrial motions, which is that this letter might have been part of a larger outline for a book. And so I wondered if they were going to try to use this to argue later that Kouri was trying to write this book. Like, hey, you didn't even write the first book, right? You're not really an author. You used a ghostwriter. This wasn't really a book that you were writing. But ultimately, that didn't play out because what we'll get into when we look at the letter, the defense did not take the position in their cross-examination that this was part of a book.
yeah, I, um, I don't know if I actually thought that it made sense to me that she, as a mother of young kids and, loss of a parent, that, and she likes to write, that she would want to write. To me, that doesn't feel that weird to me. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a lot of her writing. We have journals, we have this Sedona letter, we have the walk the dog we're going to find, talk about. We have another journal where she's sort of outlining stuff. So it's not like this is that abnormal, at least for what it appears to be. I mean, a lot of people don't journal and write. She clearly does. So, I didn't think but again, if you're a prosecutor and you're seeing this the way they want you to see it, then, it's just one more step to make money, right? It's one more step to profit off of Eric's death kind of thing. So,
Well, you could also look at it like she's got two kids to support, and we know she was in debt. So is there something necessary? I guess you could look at it, she's exploiting his death, but if she's also innocent, is it, I don't know, but I've seen plenty of people write books about grief that come from personal experiences. And I don't think we necessarily say every single one of those is used to exploit the death. But I think when we're looking at it through the lens that a lot of people are, which is that they really dislike Kouri, they're going to immediately jump to, thinking the worst about her writing
yeah, but
this
food
book.
for thought. I mean, in the world where we have Instagram and, Facebook and YouTube and TikTok, and we have a lot of grieving people, right? I mean, people make sort of these videos and share, and they do it to one, it's cathartic, right? It's therapeutic to sort of have this outwardly expression, and then also therapeutic to or cathartic to share with other people they may be going through similar circumstances. So, I mean, it's in a book form of what we see a lot of online. And so it's a leap to think that all the people online who are sharing their grief about their, loss of husband, loss of a parent, loss of a child are sitting there trying to do this for the wrong. I mean, there's a lot of people, in other words, that do it in a different media form, obviously. But here, so just things to think about. And these are discussions that I'm assuming the 12 jurors will have. They're going to go through these pieces of evidence and they're going to be able to say, and it's 12, random people and all come from different, facets of the world, and they may have like minds, they may not, and they may see it differently and help each other to see it a different way. So,
So then,
um, yeah.
as after these talk about the children's book, Detective O'Driscoll, his testimony starts to gear into subpoenas that they issued at Carmen's house, how they started looking at call logs, data location, tracking whereabouts to try to connect Carmen and Kouri. They execute a search warrant at Carmen's house. They find a gun, and she's a previous convicted felon, so that's a crime. They find some THC, some drug paraphernalia. Later, she's pulled over for driving with a suspended license. He gets into the number of interviews they do with her. She's really, they have to connect. They're trying to connect Carmen to Kouri for purchasing these drugs because they have to prove that Kouri purchased these drugs. So she's really key to this. They interview her more than 6 times, over 10 hours. 1,000 pages of transcripts. They tell her that, she's facing drug courts looking at 7 years. They can really help her with her case, though. They just need her to give them more information. She, a lot of the first interviews and some of these interviews actually get played to the jury. That she eventually gets around to saying that after the first few interviews that her, she doesn't really have a memory of this. And then the pressure, in my opinion, really starts to ramp up and she starts to, say more of what happened, that Kouri was looking for, the Michael Jackson stuff. There was a statement by one of the officers that, their goal was to get her to help them convict Kouri. I'm curious what you thought about some of the, detective strategy and trying to get this information out of Kouri and how the jury might perceive it. Are they perceiving this as she may have been not telling the truth to save her own butt because they put so much pressure on her? Or is this just, smart detective work that finally got her to tell the truth? What do you think the jury is going to think about some of that?
You mean Corey or Carmen? You mean Corey?
Carmen.
Oh, okay. Because you had said Corey. I'm like, wait a minute. Hold on. So, how the pressure on Carmen, the impact on the jury for that?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
right, like
Yeah.
the defense is going to argue that Carmen fabricates all of this to save her own butt because she's facing 7 years, and so they're trying to insinuate that Carmen wasn't telling the truth, But we see in these interviews that they are putting this pressure on there. They're telling her how long she's looking for. They're saying they can help her, how much time she's looking at. They really need her testimony. She's got to give them the information. How do you think that lands with the jury?
Well, it's interesting you say that because up until that point, I had sort of thought and resolved, okay, Corey's bought these pills, right? I mean, she obviously bought these pills. She coordinated the purchase, several, rounds of purchases through Carmen. But then when I reflected on what we see coming next, which is the walk the dog letter, and, you know, we'll go through that. But where Corey's words are, I don't use pills, I don't use drugs. And the question then becomes, okay, wait a minute. Like, so the jury's going to really have to reconcile a lot of facts here because you have the walk the dog letter that says, I don't use drugs. These are her words. I don't remember if it's pills or drugs, whatever. But you have Carmen now saying under pressure that Corey was buying these drugs. They have the locations, they've done, I think, a nice job to sort of show that, and we have obviously Robbie to say that, he was contacted by the middle woman. I think her name was Crystal, and sorry, I'm forgetting if it's not, and then we have obviously Carmen. So Carmen calls Crystal, Crystal calls Robbie, and then they have that drug deal. So they have that all, and then they geo map, they have the locations, everybody's, got that all mapped out. So I think it's going to be hard not to believe that there was drug deals going on. And it's going to be, I, if it's not Corey, then who was it? And so I think the pressure that I'm questioning is whether or not Corey said to buy fentanyl, right? So whether it's actually the fentanyl or whether it is something else that they were buying. And so I think that's the question because I'm still not convinced that it was just some oxys and, you know, because of when you're in this like drug world, fentanyl came in instead of the oxy. And so it very well could have been accidental. I mean, that's really our options. We don't have a lot of options here as far as theory of how, Eric died. But so the short story is the pressure on Carmen, it impacts me to think, okay, her credibility is questionable. But then when you sort of counter it against the other evidence, I'm like, I tend to kind of think she's telling the truth, even though it was under pressure. So, that's, I don't know where I stand. We'll keep going, but it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yep. So after the Detective O'Driscoll discusses Carmen and introduces those interviews, they do introduce through Detective O'Driscoll the two jail calls, one with Corey and her mom, one with Corey and her brother. Um, they're definitely profanity laden. She's swearing a lot in them. She's laughing, calling names of the prosecutors and the police in the case, calling them idiots. The calls seem to mostly relate to this February 14th breakfast sandwich attempted murder. What did you think about those calls?
I mean, I kind of, I think that I always say to my clients when they're talking on the phone, like it's recorded and I think that people forget that they are really recorded. And so they're just stupidity, right? I mean, why are you giving this kind of evidence to the state? But I also think, state, why are we really showing this evidence? Like, I mean, at this point, we're day 12 in this trial. It's just piling on and piling on and you'd think we're getting to the pinnacle and then I don't know. It's just her voice. You get to hear her. She's crude. She's not this like young, like innocent mom. She's, really sort of and if you're grieving and you're innocent, are you having this reaction on the phone? You
Well,
know?
she's not just she's in jail. These are jail calls. So now she's the accused, right? So, if you are wrongfully accused and you're innocent and you've been accused of, poisoning a breakfast sandwich for your husband, I mean, is it outside of the realm of crazy that you might be on the phone call saying what she's saying, right? These
Yeah.
people are so stupid. This is crazy. How do they possibly think I did this? It's possible that if the jury is seeing things through her eyes, that they could look at that call as just, yeah, that's another example of a person sitting in a jail cell who's not a grieving widow at this point. She's a pissed off, accused murderer.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking at it through the lens that she's not guilty of this, that's how you could see this. If you're looking at this through the lens that Kouri is this devious murderer, you are seeing that as somebody who's just sort of adding on to just callous nature, crude. She doesn't even care. She's laughing about this attempted murder. It's very easy to take that one phone call and see it through two very different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, and we do have to remember that there is some removal of time from the death, right? It's over a year later. It's far out. It's not close in time. So, she's obviously been battling. She lost her house. She obviously lost her, she's a lot of things that have gone on, the trust litigation, and then she's ultimately arrested. So, and then they go in and obviously they play, I think it was after that they play the 911, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We also get the 911. Um,
And the 911 call when Corey calls in, um, I listened to it.
I apologize. The
Oh,
911 call was before and we already discussed it on the last episode.
oh, we did? Oh God,
Yes.
I'm so tired.
It's been a week. It's been a
Been
week.
a
The days
week.
start to blur together.
Okay. All right.
No,
Well,
what we get into next is what I think everybody who knows anything about this case is waiting for, right? The infamous walk the dog letter. I knew about it, heard a little bit of generally about it, never read it. So the first time I really hear what's in it is when Detective O'Driscoll reads it. And actually, this was the only piece, if I recall correctly, this is the only piece of text message or email or anything or any writings that the prosecution actually has the witness read. And so obviously that's done to highlight what they're about to hear. It makes it stand out from all of the other evidence that's been portrayed. So um, I'm hoping that if this works right, we're going to play for our audience the video of Detective O'Driscoll reading the walk the dog letter.
yeah, let's go through it. And just as a side note, while you're setting it up for us, I think that so just how I just had that moment of like remembering the order of the evidence and sort of what comes in and have we discussed it or not? I mean, that is exactly an example, I think, of what the jury will be doing, right? It's going through it. Oh, no, he said this and she said that, or it came there, it came that because it's a lot. And fortunately, the jurors are allowed to bring their notebooks back with them. They are taking notes, I'm guessing. They're allowed to take notes through these types of trials. So I am, they are probably pulling it all down and having extensive notes to be able to review. All right, let's go.
All right, so this is Detective O'Driscoll reading the walk the dog letter to the jury.
So I have no sound. I don't know if,
Okay, on my end, it's playing.
is it?
Yes.
Um, well, we can just discuss it. Or when you go and press share screen, I think if you do share sound too, check it off to share the sound. Um, but in the meantime, while you're checking that out, I will just talk a little bit about this letter. So this letter comes in. They do not know that it's been confiscated from the jail. They just know that it's been written by Corey. It has been redacted. There are pieces, I think, at the beginning of the letter that has to do and drafted by, um, but with Kouri that's referencing attorney-client communication. So they have that redacted. And then I think they have another piece redacted as well towards the end. But the bottom line is that this is really what I would say is the pinnacle of their evidence. They are absolutely wanting to highlight this. They want this to go it be right in the memory of the jurors as they go back into take a break and they get to really think about what they just saw. So, is it working?
There's no option to make sure you share sound
Oh no.
when you do it.
Oh
So
no.
hold on. Actually, let's retry this. Technical difficulties. Let's try this again.
He will need
There you
Did you
go.
just have sound there? Okay.
Yes.
to tell Sky at the meeting next week.
Let me
Upon
just
information,
rewind it just a little bit because the audience probably did not hear the first part.
Thank you everyone for our
Read this letter
technical.
aloud.
page 1, walk the dog, but take vague notes so you remember. Here is what I'm thinking, but you
Just before we continue, there are redactions in here. So what Detective O'Driscoll reads to the jury is not the entirety of the letter. So there are portions that are blacked out that are redacted.
have to talk to Ronnie. He would probably have to testify to this, but it's super short, not a lot to it. He will need to tell Sky at the meeting next week. Upon information and belief, just like they say, a year prior to Eric's death, Ronnie was over watching football one Sunday, and Eric and Ronnie were chatting about Eric's Mexico trips. Eric told Ronnie he gets pain pills and fentanyl from Mexico from the workers at the ranch. Not to tell me because I would get mad, because I always said he just gets high every night and won't help take care of the kids. There are pictures in my phone of Eric passed out on the floor
We
or
pause
in
it
the
there.
chair. Ronnie should have texts from Eric
So just
talking about getting high
to
as well.
back up a little bit on this letter. So there's a couple of pieces, right, that we've gone through here that I think for the defense side is worth pointing out that she's referencing the story with Ronnie. And I think she's storytelling to say, I think I can't recall, but she's saying she's meeting with Sky next week, which is her attorney, on the cross, what I thought was a good cross actually by Attorney Nestor, even though moments of inartfulness, but she did get some good points out, which one of which was to say, that Detective O'Driscoll never followed up with to determine whether or not there was actually an appointment with Sky and whether or not they were going to be, sort of meeting. I mean, she can't say what they discussed, but she could certainly confirm whether or not potentially there was a meeting or not. And then I think that there's a lot of question as to whether or not O'Driscoll went to discuss with Ronnie.
Correct. I think he testifies they never are able to confirm one way or the other, Ronnie, but I believe he does testify that he tried and Ronnie declined an interview. But he does testify that he did not do any kind of investigation or location analysis to determine or track Eric's whereabouts during the last Mexico trip. So there are parts of this, and then we'll get into a little bit more. There are parts of this that the defense is able to use to say you didn't investigate this as a possibility because, as we'll get into in a few minutes here, there are parts that some of this bits and pieces have actually come into trial as being true.
And also, too, Kelly, it's that this is written, I think he said September of 2023. So this is a year and a half, 18 months after Eric has died. So I also think a point should be made that she may have information in here now that she did not know possibly at the time of Eric's death, right? So this example of the workers at the ranch, didn't tell me because I would get mad. I mean, Ronnie could, like, people could be telling her things along the way that she learned that she did not know at the time of his death. If you want to be on the, Kouri didn't poison him side. If you're on the Kouri poisoned him side, obviously you can view this in a very different light, which is why the prosecution is using this as their, their evidence, their main evidence.
The
But I
part
also
of this
think that that's kind of crazy to think 18 months into her arrest or after the death, 6 months after her arrest, that's when they get the magic evidence that's going to put her behind. I mean, I don't know, to think that her own words are going to, put her down.
Well, the part of this that doesn't track for me, right? Because for the most part, I actually think the defense is able throughout the cross-examination, able to use this letter to their advantage, to really put out some holes in the investigation. But the part of this that doesn't track for me relates back to things that I've said in some past episodes, which these messages that Kouri sends to Chelsea Barney that Eric doesn't do drugs. She really doubles down on that. She's very adamant that he doesn't do drugs. And now we've got this letter that he gets high every night, and she has pictures in her phone of him passed out on the floor and in the chair. So would like to see or hear an explanation that won't come about how you explain that away, and obviously the defense doesn't have to explain that away and has no burden to, but to me that's very inconsistent.
So, I mean, the only thing I can say about that consistency is, again, when she's making those statements at the beginning, right when he dies, she's like, oh my God, he doesn't do fentanyl. And then, she comes to learn, and also if she's not being accused, if she didn't have any part of this, right? If she didn't have any part of this, and then now she's 18 months later fighting for her life, she's like, whoa, like, hold up, he's gotten high. And I don't think high means with pills. It could mean the gummies, right? Because we know that he used THC gummies. So that could be the high she's referring to in here. And like he got high every night. I mean, I think she said, he did use the gummies. I think that's been established. It doesn't necessarily mean with pills. I mean, I guess you read it how you read it, but
Well, I also could look at it, there's the possibility that you look at it as if she truly had nothing to do with it. At the beginning, she's defensive, right? She's lost her husband. She wants to protect him. She doesn't want people to think that her husband died of a fentanyl overdose. She doesn't want people to think he was a drug addict. She's going to protect that image. And now she's, like you said, she's fighting for her life. Gloves are off. Here's the truth. Cards on the table. Here's everything that happened. I'll be interesting to hear, it'll be interesting to hear if that's how the defense argues it in their closing. But I do think that you could read this as being inconsistent with some of her prior text messages.
I mean, it's kind of similar to like a marriage that's gone back, you know what I mean, to the outside world. It's like, no, everything's fine. We're great. I love him. Like, it's wonderful, and then a year
best
later,
husband in the world.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the divorce. Next thing you know, it's like he's a drug addict. He's an alcoholic. He's the worst father. Sexual allegations, like abuse. You know what I mean? So it's just to me, that inconsistency doesn't necessarily strike as, that crazy. But and I do think the defense really is able to validate and corroborate what she's writing to the point that they could, right? I mean, obviously,
Well, they are able to use this letter to try to make some arguments to the jury without ever having to put in any evidence on their own. So, strategy wise, they definitely have a strategy here. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and continue on with a little bit more of the letter.
Yep.
Eric told Ronnie he keeps them in an allergy pill bottle in his work truck, so I wouldn't find them. Ronnie never told me about the conversation. Eric finally told me and asked if Carmen could get him some. Eric never wanted anyone to know he had an issue, especially get caught. He always wanted Kouri to go down for him. When they traveled, Eric would put his drugs in Kouri's bag at the airlines right before they boarded. That way, if they were caught, Kouri got in trouble, not him. Once they got to wherever they were going, Eric would pull the drugs out of her bag and it would cause a huge fight. She was pissed he would risk her going to jail for his drug use. He just would laugh about it. Eric.
So two things in here that are really striking, right? It starts with Eric kept his pills in a bottle in an allergy pill bottle in the car. And what do we know about the in his truck? And what we know about this truck that the defense is going to in their cross-examination be able to get into is that that truck was never searched by law enforcement. That truck was removed from the property by Kouri Richins a few days after the investigation. And by the time the police ever get to it, it's passed through multiple hands. This bottle, that bottle is never found, but the car is also not searched. So something in here that the defense is going to be able to use in their cross-examination to show here's a little bit of a hole, right? They got to make some cracks to make these arguments. Here's another little crack to argue to the jury, like, hey, what if this is true? What if he did keep pills in his truck? We're never going to know because the police didn't search the truck.
Yeah, I mean, the other piece that I would say to that is I think Attorney Nestor in her cross, although she was getting objected to on foundation because I don't think, she didn't introduce it artfully. However, the point to me was made, and I don't know if it's going to be made to the jury, which is that, in essence, that hydrocodone bottle that was found next to Eric's side of the bed, that ultimately was taken by the ME, the state had possession of that evidence and then taken with the body. Ultimately, I think it either got destroyed, lost, something. We don't know. It's gone. But she was saying, and she didn't know that, right? I mean, you guys never told her that you took a pill bottle next to the bed. And I think she was trying to say that basically this is an authentic story because she didn't even know that there was this hydrocodone bottle that you guys took with Eric when he was taken away. And I think that gives some credence here and sort of, bolsters what she's saying in the sense of the pill bottle. Because I think that, if he was using pills or they were buying illegal pills, and, he puts it in his allergy pill bottle or, whatever, it's to say that that's what he did. That's how he managed it. And to be honest, it's how a lot of people manage their illicit drugs, right? They put them in a prescription bottle so that it looks legal. So not uncommon.
Well, this next part of the letter, I think that this is, to me, one of the best parts that the defense was able to weave their theory and their defense into using something that the prosecution is entering to their benefit. The only piece of evidence that the defense introduces in this trial, the only testimony that they elicit was Allie's staking. And the testimony that Allie's staking, that they were able to elicit from her was that there were times where they traveled. I believe she testified about a trip to Hawaii where Eric did put weed gummies in her bag, caused a little bit of an argument. It was funny later because they didn't get caught. But that's an example in this letter, and the defense is able to point this out, that part was true. The jury has now heard evidence that this part was true. And so they can use that to argue this part was true, but they didn't investigate these other parts that may also be true. So at least part of this is true. It's not complete fabrication. The jury has now heard parts of this that are corroborated, and look at these other parts that you just didn't bother to track down or you didn't bother to investigate. So they are able to use this to their advantage, I think, in one of the best ways that the defense has been able to get into an issue.
Yeah, me too. I thought that was a really, good point by Attorney Nestor to show that this was something that they should have, considered by validating whether or not the rest of these statements were true. I did notice, though, she goes into third person. So she's in first and then she kind of transitions into the Kouri. But she tends to, it looks like that's how she writes. She writes, I think there's another journal that they put in sort of her timeline of events, I think later in the trial, or maybe it's before.
It's interesting because the Sedona letter, right? It was the perspective was the prompt asked for the perspective, right? It from, Kouri did this and Kouri's life. That was the prompt that it was asked for. And this does go in and out of first person and third person. So I'm just going to let Detective Driscoll read the rest of the letter, and then we can summarize our analysis.
Couldn't ruin his image that he had drug issues, so he would do whatever he had to. Kouri has never done any type of pills, didn't like them. Rarely would she consume THC only if Eric begged her because it was a special occasion. Reword this however he needs to make the point, just include it all. The connection has to be made with Mexico and drugs. Ronnie will have the messages to prove Eric confided in him about getting high. It can be short and to the point, but has to be done. Upon information and belief, LOL. They never found pain pills or fentanyl in my house because he hid it in allergy bottle in work truck, and Cody emptied out work truck within a week, so they were never found. When you talk to Ronnie about this, meet up with him in person. I worry sometimes your house and phone are bugged. Maybe drive down to SL and meet him after work without Bree. Tell Ronnie, don't overanalyze it. It was a quick 2-minute conversation, LOL. Tell him I need him to do this. Bring me home and then we will get those damn bitches. Also, please text Lotto or call. Tell him do not text me anything about us doing things together ever. Like church, skiing, trips, nothing that puts us together. It doesn't look good. We're so close to the end, let's push through. Have the conversation with Ronnie before he meets with Sky. Then tell him to tell Sky at the meeting about the conversation. Hang in there, we're almost there. Love you to the moon. Take vague notes of all this so you remember before you walk the dog.
That's the end of the infamous walk the dog letter. What'd you think about the way that ended?
So, you know, I tend to see her truthfulness in this letter. I'm seeing it through the lens of if she's writing this and you're innocent and you're in jail and you're like, hey, I need you to do this. I need you to do that. Tell Ronnie to do this. Don't say anything about going to church and going skiing with Lotto because it's going to
I don't
look
think we ever
bad.
learned who Lotto is.
Yeah, we don't even know who Lotto is, but I'm thinking like this is the mind of like a person who probably didn't kill her husband, who's like, don't tell I went to church with Lotto. Like, because at this, her mind's racing and she's thinking they're using everything against me. And, I don't know who Lotto is. We don't ever learn who Lotto is, but, that's the paranoia. It's not like, don't tell Carmen or, I don't know. I mean, I just found it to be like, okay, if this is the intimidation that we're talking about, like, I'm not sure we're there. Also,
And the prosecution is definitely going to try to argue that this was Kouri instructing her brother to falsify this statement to help her,
yeah,
right?
but the problem with that, Kelly, is that she's so adamant. She's like, Ronnie will have the text messages to back this up. Why would you put that in writing if they didn't exist?
At the same time, and it is a little bit of burden shifting, at the same time, Ronnie doesn't give those text messages to the police when they ask, and the defense doesn't introduce those text messages. Now, they have no burden to do that, but if you're the jury and not, if the jury is going to be asking that same, I think the jury is going to be asking the same question, well, where are the text messages with Ronnie? If that's true, why didn't Kouri introduce those?
Why didn't the officer go get them? So
Why didn't they get a subpoena?
Ronnie never got this letter, right? Let's remember, Ronnie never got this letter. Nobody got this letter. Mom, dad, didn't get this letter. And so these messages were actually, this was never conveyed. But so we don't even know if Ronnie has
Except it was broadcast all over every social media channel.
Immediately?
In the pretrial hearings, the content of the letter, the unredacted contents of the letter have been read. So it might be difficult to make that argument, but they never testified that the prosecution doesn't call them and Kouri doesn't call them. So nobody gets an opportunity to ask them.
Well, what we know is Attorney Nestor does say, you got 10 search warrants on this case. You didn't go get the phone. I mean, he
says, oh, we didn't have probable cause.
Which we know is just bullshit. I mean, excuse my language, but that's just not true.
That's
just not true. This letter in itself, if you're saying this letter is the pinnacle of your evidence, then you're going to tell me that it's not enough to go check on those text messages? Like, of course it is. of course, you swear under affidavit, say you've got to, you, what you believe is information. I mean, upon information believed, she writes it herself. Ronnie's got text messages to show. I mean, he could have done it. He didn't do it because obviously they read it in a way that the prosecution wants you to read it, which is that the entire thing is false. So, and they just stopped there. Now, had they done what they could have done to validate that it wasn't true and really checked that off, just taken it one step further, this would be very, very painful for her. I think it's still a little too, I think there's really good room in here to argue to at least create some doubt, a little doubt.
Right. The way I've always thought of police investigations and how you attack them as a criminal defense attorney is that there's all these doors. There's all these, you start an investigation, it opens one door. That door can lead to four more doors. At the end of the day, when you bring your case to the jury, you only want one door that's left open. This is what happened. This is how it happened. And we're going to prove and walk you all through all of the other doors and show you how we closed the other ones. We investigated all the other possibilities. We closed those doors. Those aren't possible. This is the only way that this happened beyond a reasonable doubt. That's why you find her guilty. The defense's job is to come in and try to crack those doors back open.
Bust them all
and that's
open.
what they're
Yeah.
And if you never even close it, if you never even investigate it, it allows them to blow it right open. It's going to ultimately depend on how the jury views this letter. To me, I thought that this was, and maybe it's because we're watching it online and, reading comments on social media and things, but I thought this was going to be mic drop moment. Kouri's guilty. Here's how we prove it. And I was left, I don't know if the jury is going to feel that way, but I was left disappointed. I did not think that it was or is the strongest piece of evidence for the prosecution. But at the end of the day, that this is the last witness that the defense or that the prosecution calls. This is it. That's the end of the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a confession. And I think that she's clearly telling everyone what her theory is of the case, of which I believe they've corroborated to some extent in the trial with the cross exams of the various witnesses. I mean, she even says that Eric has her buying these pills from Carmen. Okay, I mean, that validates the fact that
Is
she's
that
buying
possible?
pills from Carmen. And we don't know. I mean, they could have been,
Not denying bought pills from Carmen, not denying it. Were
yeah,
they fentanyl? Did Eric ask her?
yeah,
I think that's the part that the prosecution left open. So the prosecution gets the rest of that letter in. The defense is able to cross-examine. We definitely highlighted a couple of the points. I thought the defense was able to score some points here. And after his testimony is finished, that's it. The prosecution rests. And that is the close of the evidence. And the defense now has a really important decision to make as a team and for Kouri, which is, do we put on a case? Does our client testify? I think that they promised or possibly outlined to the jury and made the jury think, and definitely made the judge and the prosecution think that they were going to call a case. They take a little bit of a recess on day 13. O'Driscoll's testimony does go over into the next day, into day 13. They wrap that up. And the defense is given some time. I think the judge gives them 90 minutes to talk to Kouri, go over, whether or not they're going to put on a case and whether or not she's going to testify. Because at the end of the day, you, me, any defense attorney can think, client, this is a terrible idea. Please do not get on the stand. Do not testify. It's not going to go well for you. You're opening the door. It inherently starts a burden shifting, inherently burden shifts. It makes the jury think, like, who do I believe, you or them? And they have those important questions to answer. And at the end of the day, the client, and in this case, Kouri Richins, is the only one that gets to make that determination.
yeah. I mean, just to back up a little bit, Attorney Nestor, I think finally sort of brings it home at the end with Attorney O'Driscoll. You can tell she's very comfortable with Attorney O'Driscoll. They have a little, he smirks at her. Like, I mean, they probably have
He
dealt
was
with each
very
other.
off-putting in
Yeah, they've
cross-examination.
probably dealt with each other before, maybe, maybe not, but it appeared that, and maybe other, pretrial hearings, they've had evidentiary hearings and all that. So, they've certainly encountered each other at this point. You can tell there's some familiarity. And she really questions him about what he knows. And he really, like, I don't know if it was the overwhelming trial, like, nerves in court, cameras on him, all that stuff. I mean, he was looking very dapper. He had his nice suit and his, nice tie, and he's looking ready for court. But he really, in my opinion, lost it a little bit with me because he could not tell her some basic facts, right? Like she asked him, for example, um, I think stuff about the truck, stuff about the warrants, timing of certain things, phone calls, text messages. She was asking, I think one of the pertinent parts towards the end was the last text message between Kouri and Eric was actually, I think, kind of like a celebratory text message. They were texting about the Midway house, the house that they were going to be, purchasing. And so, she got in, he was like, I don't know, I can't remember. It just seemed evasive. And, you're the lead officer. This is your
Not
case.
only the lead officer, but he's been sitting there watching every single day of testimony. So
Right.
he has seen everything happen.
So to me, it's like, are you not wanting to answer, or do you really not remember? Were you paying attention in this, like, you know, things about for example, the warrant for Ronnie's text messages. And he's like, well, that was 3 years after or whatever, however much time. And she's like, but you just got a warrant. Like, did you not just get a warrant like
Like
three
a
weeks
month ago.
ago? Yeah, like, I mean, what are we talking about? You just keep getting warrants. So, I mean, he just looked like he was lying. I don't know. It didn't sit well with me or evasive. I guess I shouldn't be as strong to
There
say
was
lying, but
there was a moment
evasive.
he really lost credibility with me too. Attorney Nestor was asking him about how how other people had helped in the investigation, and it was a question about Gabler, the prior PI that testified, who we heard contacted law enforcement to the house, was finding evidence, calling law enforcement over to the house for months after they were done searching. And he was like, no, he was there to help the civil case.
Yeah, he
And it's
wasn't
like,
there for our
but we
case.
already know that here, then why did the prosecution call him? We already know, the jury already heard. He was working with the police. He was helping you. Don't sit here and try to feed me a bunch of bull that he was only helping on the on the civil side.
Or you're hurting your case because now you're discrediting the star
Your own,
PI who
yeah.
basically was like, I followed them and I put this whole thing together with Carmen. And, I mean, so they're sort of crossing, that was not good. But at the end of it, she was really able to get the guts of the case out of him. And that was the last thing the jurors heard, which is, you can't tell me how the fentanyl got into Eric Richins. You can't tell me how Kouri Richins got it into him. You can't even tell me that it was fentanyl that was sold to Kouri Richins. You don't know. You don't have any trace, you don't have any evidence, and there's no forensics. Like, she goes down a line of questioning and she sits down, and then that's it. That's the last thing they hear. And I think that is what gave her basically, the ability to say, we don't need to add anything else here. Because that was a really good stretch to end on and leave it with the jury. Because at the end of the day, you can believe all this stuff. You could believe Kouri, and it sounds like she was bad business person. You can believe
Maybe even financial crimes.
she's a financial criminal, right? She stole from her friend. She clearly, whether or not you believe it was forgery or not, I don't know. But, there's all these other side issues beyond the murder charge or the attempted murder charge. But you do not have enough to say that she murdered. You can believe, again, she's a bad person. She's done this other stuff, but it's a big leap to go ahead and say she's also a murderer. So I thought that was a good sort of close for her. And then they did rest. and then they
A little bit of drama behind the probably the most dramatic moment of a defense resting that I've ever seen. There was a little bit of chicken going on with the defense and the prosecution. There was some talk about these other possible witnesses that might get called, about some other investigations into drugs and related to Eric and some drugs. And the defense was making it seem like they might call somebody, and the prosecution's like, well, if they want to call this witness, then we're going to call somebody. And there was a moment where the prosecution said something along the lines of, well, we need to know if they're going to call them, because if not, then we're going to call them in our case in chief instead of waiting for rebuttal. And the judge kind of shot that down. Like, you don't get to know. It's your case in chief. Put it on. You don't get to know. Who you call in your case in chief is not determined by who the defense calls. They rest. Ultimately, the defense comes back and rests. There was a little strange moment where there's some judges like, who's your first witness? And they say, we have some options. There's some whispering between Attorney Lewis and Attorney Nestor. And then ultimately, they rest and they do not put on any evidence. And then the judge does a colloquy with Kouri to make sure that she understands and is knowingly and voluntarily waiving her constitutional right to testify on her own behalf, which she does. And that concludes the evidence that the jury has heard. The evidence is done, it's closed. And on Monday, so Friday, there was a little bit of, it was just some of the defense team, some of the prosecution team in doing the very nitty gritty work of putting together the jury instructions. What are we telling the jury? What do they have to decide? Looking at the verdict slip. You know, they were working hard in court on that on Friday, which is all going to lead up to Monday with the closing arguments.
Yeah, the charge conference, which is where the attorneys get to really advocate to make sure that the judge reads out the instructions to the jury. And these instructions to the jury, not only are they read to them, but typically in a murder case, they are brought with them. They're allowed to bring them back into the room with them. And it's really just a checklist. You know, it's 100 pages long, and they get to really analyze the facts and then apply it to the law. That's their job. They have to figure out what happened, and then they have to see, okay, now that we agree what happened, does it fit into the purview and does it meet all of the elements of the case? And if it doesn't meet all of the elements of the case, then it's a not guilty. And you also have to have a unanimous verdict. So not only do you have to check off all the elements, but everybody has to agree that that's what happened. And so the conference, Attorney Nestor, one thing that I know why she was, I mean, she's really, battling it out to just make that record no matter what. And she was looking for the instruction of basically, what I would consider a Bowden instruction, right? Like a lack of investigation. I'm not sure what they call it in Utah, but in essence, she wanted some, or the destruction of evidence. I'm sorry, the spoliation. So it was the hydrocodone bottle was ultimately nobody knows what happened, and the judge doesn't allow her to get that instruction on spoliation. That basically you should infer when there's spoliation of evidence, you should infer that it was positive for the defense. That, in other words, it would have helped Kouri to prove her innocence. But the judge is not going to allow that instruction to happen because he basically says there wasn't enough in the record. And I agree, because we don't really know what flushed out with that bottle. So where did it go? Who had it? What was in it?
There were
How did it get
questions
lost?
that were asked that insinuated the ME's office throughout the bottle, but nobody actually asked the ME that. And so questions aren't evidence. So what actually is in evidence, there's not really a foundation for that piece of it.
So he does say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to, well, he doesn't say I'm sorry, but he's like, I'm not going to give that, I'm not going to give that instruction. And of course, she's not precluded. She's allowed to argue that, right? So she certainly is allowed to argue it, but the jurors are not going to see that in black and white. And when you see it in black and white, it's pretty powerful. I mean,
Yeah,
again,
and for those of you who want, of those of our listeners who I can imagine if you're watching this and listening to this, maybe you watched the Karen Reed trial, and we saw firsthand in trial one, with what came out with the juror interviews after, how the jury instructions and the verdict slips, how critical they are, how critical it is to get the instructions to be clear so that a non-lawyer who's back there reading them understands it, can follow it so that they know what to do and what to do if they have questions about it. Because we saw firsthand in that case, basically a mistrial that should have potentially been an acquittal because of some confusion on that jury slip. And so as a defense attorney, you want to make sure that that's right. I can think back to one of my trial practice skills classes or a training I went to, and it was a mock trial, and the one of the test parts was, counsel, do you want to see the verdict slip before I give it to the jury? And I remember saying, no, 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 in my head, I trust the court. Of course you got it right. And that was the one piece I remember, like the criticism, you always look at the verdict slip. Do
Yeah.
not just trust the judge, don't trust the clerk. And actually in cases that I've tried, there have been issues with that verdict slip, and you want to make sure that it's right. Because ultimately that's what determines your client's fate back there with the jury.
It's funny you say that because at the end of the charge conference, the judge said, we have it all set with the defense exhibits. We're good to go. Prosecutor, we do not have all the states with exhibits. Like, we have some confusion here. There's a lot of transcripts. We're not sure, do we all agree all these transcripts are going into evidence? I was like getting the chills. I'm like, oh my God, that is so scary, because really it is what matters, what goes back. And you do double check it. You make sure those redactions, I'm sure they've spent a lot of time, they're going through that this weekend to make sure that what the jury gets, because it's going to be one big pile and probably on a USB that they'll be able to look at it through the computer together. But if it's wrong, or if they've allowed something in that wasn't supposed to be in, or didn't get something in that they wanted in, it's a really, it's a big deal. And the jurors, I expect, will go through everything. I mean, I think they, at least, here in Massachusetts, they get the instruction to don't take a straw poll, right away. Go through the evidence, talk about it, then take a vote. So hopefully Utah gives a similar instruction, because I think it does, it's helpful to have these discussions and look through the evidence, even though they may be leaning a certain way. Having a discussion about how someone else might help flesh these issues out. So we have closing arguments on Monday. And then obviously the jury charge, they're going to read the jury instructions. And then the jury will
So
go back.
if you like this episode and you like the content, please like, subscribe, please comment, questions, feedback. Like we said at the top of this, we'd love to hear that. And we will definitely be back on Monday with a recap of the closings.
Thank you.